Hello my friends, welcome back to another episode of r/Entitled People, where people believe that the world revolves around them and that nobody else matters. Much like this person right here, who left a note on an ambulance while they were responding to an emergency call. The note says, "I don't care if you're an ambulance, you can't block people's driveways. Either ask or come out when we beep the horn for 10 minutes. What the heck could they have been doing inside that house when she was honking her horn for a good 10 minutes? They were probably saving someone's life." Guys, in this episode, you're gonna hear 3 stories. The first is an entitled grandma stealing clothes. The second story is a neighbor who calls the cops because OP was walking too loudly. And we'll finish up with a short story about a dog snatcher. Guys, I hope you stay for the stories today, and do remember to relax and take deep breaths if you start to feel your blood boil. Let's get into the stories. This first story is titled, "My Entitled Grandmother Stole My New Clothes and Exchanged Them for Steel Utensils." I'm Indian, and in my country till a few years ago, you could get steel utensils from door-to-door vendors in exchange for clothes. This barter system still exists in villages and some small towns. My grandmother, being the insane hoarder she was, loved getting utensils in this manner. Utensils that no one else was allowed to touch, that she would never use and would only gather dust in her room. Anytime my stepmom or dad tried to donate our old clothes to charity, she would throw a hissy fit. She'd collect all the clothes we weren't going to wear anymore so she could exchange them for pots and pans. At times, she would take it a step further and demand clothes that we were still gonna wear. She would insist that they don't fit us anymore, sometimes calling us fat or some other stupid argument to get us to hand them over. Seriously, we had to sometimes fight her to keep our clothes. Oh, but she never, and I mean never, gave away her own clothes. She only took garments from others, namely me, my dad, my stepmom, and my stepbrother. When I was around 21, I had just lost a lot of weight and needed new clothes. So one day, I went to a local store's clearance sale and bought a bunch of new threads. I left them on my bed and went to a friend's place. When I returned a few hours later, my new clothes were gone. My dad, stepmom, and brother weren't home, so I figured out instantly who must have taken them. I confronted the grand monster and asked her what she'd done with my clothes. She was sitting on her bed, admiring her latest haul of pots and pans. Without even looking up, she told me that my clothes were ugly and too westernized, and that she did the right thing by exchanging them for something useful, something she never even uses. As you can imagine, I lost my temper. I yelled, I cursed at her, I called her every name in the book, and she had the audacity to actually defend her actions. That evening, there was a major showdown in our home. I was still livid and asked my dad exactly how long we were going to put up with her abuse. My stepmother and I don't get along, but when one of us was up against Grand Monster, the other always lent support. And this was no different. My stepmother agreed with me wholeheartedly. My dad told the Grand Monster that she was now forbidden from entering my room without prior permission. She started to fake cry and said that we were all being so cruel to her. My dad later came to my room and said he would make it up to me and buy me new clothes. I, of course, was still livid, and I wasn't about to let her have this victory. My grandmother needed sleeping pills to fall asleep, and she took them even during the day, and she slept like the dead. A few days later, I snuck into her room during her afternoon nap. I opened her utensils trunk, and yes, she had a whole trunk full of them, and took out a bunch of her beloved pots, glasses, plates, etc. I shut the lid quietly and exited. I went straight to an old age shelter that was nearby, and I donated all the utensils and earned the joy of giving the taste of sweet, sweet revenge. I didn't tell anyone what I'd done, and just waited for Grand Monster to discover her loss, which she did just a few days later. It happened in the evening. My dad called me into my grandmother's room and asked if I knew anything about the missing utensils. I admitted that I had taken and donated them. Grand Monster looked like her head would explode. I calmly told her I'd done the right thing, because those utensils were ugly and that the shelter needed them more. And clearly, if she could come into my room and take my things without asking, I could jolly well do the same. I think my dad was upset with me, but he really had nothing to say to me, and I slept so well that night, and she never went into my room again. I love that part where the grandma started to fake cry and said everyone's so cruel to her. That's an entitled person's secret weapon when they don't get their way. Just start the waterworks and act like the whole world is against them. This story is titled, "My Neighbor Called the Cops Because We Decided to Clean Our Apartment." So my boyfriend and I moved into an apartment in August. It's older, so the floors are super creaky. According to our lease, we're obligated to cover 90% of any room with carpet, except for the bathroom and kitchen to help with noise. It turned out that our apartment was previously managed as a dorm by the local college, so the floors already had a layer of super thin but crappy carpet. We also laid down more rugs to help with noise cancellation. Our downstairs neighbor moves in about a month later, and within a month of that, she starts banging on her ceiling when we get too rowdy. The first couple of times, it happened super late in the evening. We were moving around after midnight, and she came to talk to us and asked us to keep it down at night. Sure, fair enough. The next time was when we walked in from the airport at 10 p.m. She came up, banged on the door, and talked over my explanation. I told her I was sorry, and asked when she was hearing the noise, assuming it was just a cat running around at night. No, she tells me that she knows it's not the cat, she knows it's us, and she doesn't live alone. Okay, weird, but whatever. We started going to bed earlier as we settled into the apartment and our jobs, but the banging only continued. For months, she would hit her ceiling whenever we walked around. Bed at 10 o'clock, bang. Wake up at 5:30 for work, bang. Sitting on the couch but decide you want snacks, bang. Around Christmas, she comes up to our door again. My boyfriend answered, and this time I recorded, and I'm so glad that I did. The woman came up and looked my boyfriend in the eye and said, "You have to stop following me." What? She then says, "I know it's not the cat, or the dog, or your girlfriend, because I know your footsteps. I don't know how you figured it out, but you figured out how to listen to where I am, and you're following me around in my apartment, and I'm sick of it." My boyfriend calmly responded that she sounds crazy, and that we don't care about her. She again reminded us that she doesn't live alone, and that her boyfriend is a tough man. Cool. I guess she's insane, but whatever. The banging continued, with us stomping every time we heard it. She didn't like that, but it made it more fun. We already explained the situation to the landlord and the super, and they were on our side. Our town was the first in the US to be locked down under quarantine, so for the first few days, the banging gradually increased until one day, this woman lost her mind. I'll admit that we're early risers on the weekend. On this particular Sunday, we ended up waking up super early, but not doing much for the first few hours. We drank some coffee and sat on the couch until almost 11. At that point, we decided to get up and clean the apartment, and she lost it. She had to be running from one end of her apartment to the other. She's banging her ceiling so hard that we're convinced she's damaging it. At one point, I hear what sounds like muffled yelling after she followed me into my bedroom. We had plans that day, so we ignored her. We finished cleaning and started to leave. She must have been waiting for us to leave, because for the first time ever, she walked out of her apartment right as we got to her landing. I was holding the dog while waiting for my boyfriend to come down, and she starts to descend the stairs. Of course, she decides to turn around and say something. She says, "Tell your boyfriend to cut it out." I responded, "Cut what out? Walking?" She responded, "You make too much damn noise, all the time." I told her that she's hitting the ceiling because me and the dog moving, not him. She continues to spew some other dumb crap as my boyfriend gets down to me. She proceeded to stay exactly 3 steps ahead of him, slowing us all the way down the stairs. She tried to block us going out the door at the bottom, but backed off when he didn't stop moving. She's continuing to yell at him all the way to the parking lot. Of myself and my boyfriend, he's typically the hothead while I'm the calm one. Amazingly, he kept his calm the whole time, calling her only a crazy lady and ignoring her as he walked past her to the car. As I passed her car, she decided to continue talking at me, and I was super pissed not to engage. She says, "I'm serious, it's done. You need to stop being so noisy. It ends today." I replied, "What do you want us to do, crawl? I already told you we have a 60-pound dog and we're all just walking around." She then says, "And you need to remember that I don't live alone." Okay, neither do I. You see my boyfriend right here, so what's your point? By the way, that's the third or fourth time you've said that, and that could be taken as a threat. She says to me, "You think that's a threat? Fine, it is." I told her that I'm calling the cops, and she says, "Not if I call them first. I'll see that they throw you in jail. I'll have you arrested." We both call the cops and they pull up. They talk to her first, and then come talk to us. I don't know what she told them, but when they came to talk to us, I told them everything she said and done for the past 6 months. The officer explained that it was a civil matter that would have to be dealt with by the landlord, but assured us that they explained to her that it's perfectly acceptable to walk around your apartment at 11 a.m. on a Sunday. They also told her not to knock on our door ever again, and that she's not allowed to bang on our floor over footsteps at any point. And for a couple of nights, she got back at us by banging at 1:30 a.m. to wake us up. We had already reached out to our landlord again, and this time, he told us he'd see what her problem is. That's still not the last of his troubles with her though. We ended up talking to the people that live below her, and telling them about the banging. And it turns out, they've heard it this whole time, but had no idea what it was. And now they know, and they've also reported her to the landlord. The banging has stopped, and we don't expect her lease to be renewed, and we may end up in a better apartment in the next couple of months. Edit. A few comments have tried to paint my neighbor as innocent in this. I want to clarify that she made direct threats to me when I apologized and told her that we'd take care of it. That was the first time she met me, and all I did was apologize and say we'd fix it. She was never trying to be friendly and work it out. We have never engaged her, nor have we ever provoked her. That was the biggest issue with older apartments. Like when you rented a place, you had to cross your fingers and hope that the neighbors above you were respectful. Good thing a lot of apartments nowadays have concrete floors or better soundproofing. This last story is titled, "Entitled Neighbor Took My Mother to Court to Get Primary Custody of My Mother's Dog." When my mother and her dog moved next door to the entitled neighbor, they fell in love with my mother's dog, Max. For about 2 years, the entitled neighbor would come get Max for visits. The entitled neighbor would watch Max if my mother went out of town, or just so they could play with him. The entitled neighbor moved across town, and would still call to ask for Max visits. My mother started letting the dog go less and less, but would say yes now and again because of the entitled neighbor's pleading. Just before one of the arranged visits, Max got into a fight with another dog. Max seemed to be okay. When the entitled neighbor came, my mother said she was worried about letting him go because of the dog fight. The entitled neighbor promises that she would look after Max and make sure he was okay. The next day, the entitled neighbor calls my mother and told her that she took Max to the vet because he had a wound on his neck. The entitled neighbor also told my mother that she was keeping Max because my mother neglected the dog. My mother was devastated and she called the police, and they couldn't help because she had agreed to allow the dog to go with the entitled neighbor. My mother had to file a civil complaint. It took 2 months to go to court. The entitled neighbor had the audacity to tell the judge that she and my mother always had shared custody of the dog, and that the entitled neighbor was the most fit dog parent, so she should have the dog. The judge explained that Max was my mother's possession, and that the entitled neighbor was to return him immediately. And no, my mother did not have to give the entitled neighbor visitation. The part where she lied to the judge and told him that they had shared custody was absolutely insane, guys. Imagine letting your friend watch your dog, and then they end up keeping the dog. That 2 months away from Max waiting for the court date must have been devastating for the mother. Some entitled people are crazy. Guys, and that's it for another episode of r/Entitled People. If you guys missed the last episode, an entitled lady freaks out because OP's stepson looks nothing like him, and she tries to kidnap him, so that's a fun story. If you aren't subscribed, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on future entitled people stories, and I'll see you guys in the next one.